You have been losing power your entire life, and you never even realized it. Every time you cared too much, every time you rushed to explain yourself, every time you checked to see if someone approved of you, every time you felt that quiet desperation to be understood, you gave away something most people will never understand the value of. It did not feel like weakness. It felt human. It felt natural. It felt like connection, like effort, like sincerity. But in reality, it was the silent erosion of your authority. Every glance you sent toward someone for approval was a transfer of power. Every explanation you offered when none was asked for was a surrender. Every reaction you could not contain was a signal read not by your conscious mind, but by every person watching you that you could be moved, manipulated, and controlled. Think about the moments in your life when you cared the most. Think about the relationships where you invested everything. Think about the conversations where you tried hardest to be understood. Now ask yourself in those moments, how much power did you hold? How much respect did you command? How much stillness lived inside you? The answer, if you are honest with yourself, is very little. Because caring unchecked, uncontrolled, indiscriminate caring is not a virtue in the arena of power. It is a vulnerability. And the world, whether you accept this or not, is an arena. Most people wake up every morning and unknowingly begin the process of bleeding out. Not physically, not financially, but psychologically. They hand pieces of themselves to co-workers who will never value them. They seek validation from people whose opinions were never worth having. They react to provocations that were designed specifically to trigger them. They care about what others think of their choices, their appearance, their silence, their words. They live their entire lives in a constant auction, selling their power to anyone who bids for their attention. You have done this. I have done this. Every person alive has done this. But there is a difference between those who continue doing it and those who choose to stop. The man who cannot control what he cares about can never control anything else. His mind is not his own. His decisions are not entirely his own. His identity shifts with every room he enters, every opinion he encounters, every criticism that lands near him. He is not a person with power. He is a mirror reflecting whatever stands in front of him. But the man who masters the art of not caring, he becomes something different entirely, something rarer. Something that most people feel but cannot name, a force of controlled presence, of deliberate stillness, of a will that cannot be moved by ordinary pressure. Tonight, you will begin to understand what that force is, how it is built, how it is protected, and how, once developed, it becomes the most powerful thing you will ever possess. Most people will live their entire lives never discovering this truth. But tonight, you will. There is something you possess that is more valuable than money, more powerful than status, and more dangerous than any weapon. It is not your intelligence. It is not your network. It is not your reputation, though all of these matter. It is your emotional energy. It is what you care about, and how visibly you care about it. Most people give this away freely. They spend it on people who have not earned it. They waste it on moments that do not deserve it. They surrender it in arguments that were never worth having. They pour it into seeking approval from people they secretly do not even respect. And every time they do this, they surrender their position. Not dramatically, not all at once, but slowly. The way a great wall does not collapse in one storm, it erodes, grain by grain, until one day nothing solid remains. Consider what it means when you are visibly affected by something someone says to you. Consider the moment someone insults you in a room full of people, and you feel the heat rise in your face, and you respond loudly, defensively, emotionally. What have you communicated? You have communicated that they found you, that their words reached inside you and touched something real. You have given them the most valuable confirmation they could receive that you can be moved. And once someone knows they can move you, they will never stop trying. Now consider the alternative. The person who receives the same insult, who looks at the speaker for a moment, who says nothing or very little, who does not change their expression, who simply continues. What does that person communicate? Something entirely different. They communicate that the words did not land, that the speaker's power over them is non-existent. And in that moment, without raising a voice, without a single act of aggression, that person has won something that cannot be taken back easily. Your emotional response is currency. Every time you spend it publicly, you reveal your price. You tell the world exactly what it takes to destabilize you, and the world will use that information. People consciously and unconsciously catalog your emotional triggers, and return to them. The man who does not care, who genuinely, strategically, philosophically does not care, is the man no one can price. He cannot be bought with praise, because praise does not move him. He cannot be broken with criticism, because criticism does not find a place to land. He cannot be manipulated through his ego, because his ego is not on display, is not available, is not offered to the room. This is the truth that most people will never be told. Your indifference, properly developed, is your most powerful asset. Not the indifference of bitterness, not the cold withdrawal of someone who was hurt and never healed. That is not power, that is wound. The indifference that commands power is the indifference of a man who has looked honestly at what deserves his energy and made a deliberate, disciplined decision about where his care will and will not go. That decision, repeated daily, reinforced through discipline, protected fiercely, is the foundation of everything that follows. More than 500 years ago, Niccolò Machiavelli observed this pattern with the precision of a surgeon and the coldness of a strategist. He was not a romantic. He was not a moralist. He was a man who studied power, real power, the kind exercised in courts and councils, in wars and negotiations, in the private decisions of princes who held the lives of thousands in their hands. He watched rulers rise. He watched rulers fall. He recorded what he saw with ruthless honesty, and what he discovered, again and again, was a truth that separated those who held power from those who eventually surrendered it. The most powerful individuals were not the loudest. They were not the most emotional. They were not the ones who wanted power most visibly and desperately. They were the most controlled. In The Prince, Machiavelli wrote about the ruler who must be both lion and fox, bold enough to face threats, but cunning enough to recognize traps. But beneath all of his strategic observations lay a deeper principle, one that ran through every lesson he recorded. The man who cannot govern himself cannot govern anything else. Machiavelli watched princes fall because they cared too much about being loved. He watched them make military decisions based on vanity. He watched them negotiate from emotion rather than strategy, and lose everything as a result. He watched men who had built kingdoms crumble them with a single act of uncontrolled reaction, a burst of anger in the wrong room, a display of fear at the wrong moment, a surrender to flattery when clarity was required. And he watched others, quieter men, more controlled men, accumulate and hold power with what appeared to outsiders as almost effortless authority. The difference was never talent. It was never birthright alone. It was not even intelligence in the conventional sense. It was the ability to separate what is from what one wishes to be true. It was the discipline to act from observation rather than emotion. It was the philosophical understanding that caring, excessive, unguarded, publicly displayed, caring, is the mechanism by which power drains from the ambitious into the hands of the calculating. Machiavelli understood that power is not given. It is not inherited in any permanent sense. It is held only by those disciplined enough to maintain the internal conditions that make holding it possible. The moment a ruler's emotional interior became visible, the moment his fear, or his desire, or his hunger for approval showed itself in his face, in his voice, in his decisions, he ceased to be the most powerful person in the room. Someone else was. This lesson was not written for the 15th century. It was not written for princes and republics alone. It was written for every human being who has ever sat across from another human being and felt the quiet erosion of their authority because they wanted something too visibly. It was written for you. The art of not caring is not modern psychology. It is ancient strategy. It is the foundational principle that Machiavelli documented in the courts of Italy 5 centuries ago and that still operates without revision, without exception, in every room you walk into today. Power does not come from making people feel needed by you. Power comes from making people uncertain whether they are needed at all. This is where most people fail. They believe that demonstrating investment, showing enthusiasm, expressing desire, making their interest visible, will generate respect and attraction and authority. They believe that the more they care, the more valuable they appear. They believe vulnerability is closeness, and closeness is power. They are wrong, not because caring is weak in itself, but because visible, uncontrolled, unstrategic caring communicates something specific to the minds of those around you. It communicates need, and need is the opposite of power. Power is quiet, power is selective, power is controlled. The man who walks into a room and needs nothing from it, who does not need to be acknowledged, does not need to be included, does not need to be praised or feared or noticed, is the most powerful person in that room, not because he is performing confidence, but because he has genuinely detached from the need for external validation. And that detachment creates something that draws people toward him with a force they cannot fully explain. Think about the people in your life who have commanded the most real, lasting respect, not admiration, not fear, not people-pleasing agreement, but genuine, quiet respect. Were they the people who tried the hardest? Who talked the most? Who explained themselves most fully? Who needed most visibly? Or were they the ones who seemed to require very little? Who moved at their own pace? Who could take or leave a conversation and were equally comfortable in either direction? The principle is this: your indifference to the outcome communicates that you have options, and the person with options is never fully at the mercy of any one situation, any one relationship, any one opinion. That person operates from abundance, not desperation. And abundance, even perceived abundance, is the foundation of authority. Here is where the transformation becomes practical. Most people relate to everything as though it is the only thing. The conversation they are having is the only conversation. The relationship they are in is the only relationship. The opinion being formed about them right now is the one that defines them. This scarcity thinking makes them grip everything too tightly, and anything gripped too tightly either breaks or slips away. Power is loose-handed. Power holds things without clinging to them. The art of not caring is not the art of detachment from life. It is the art of detachment from outcomes you cannot control. It is the discipline of releasing your grip on other people's perceptions and trusting that your consistency, your stillness, your controlled presence will create a more powerful impression than any performance of effort ever could. Silence communicates this. Deliberate pause communicates this. The choice not to explain yourself communicates this. The ability to walk away from a conflict without the need to have the last word. This communicates something so rare, so uncommon, that most people who witness it feel it in their bodies before they understand it in their minds. You are a man who does not need to win every moment, because you understand that the person who needs to win every moment has already revealed their weakness. Power is quiet, power is selective, power is controlled. Say it again. Understand it completely. Let it replace what you were taught. When you stop caring visibly, something happens inside the minds of those around you that they cannot fully control. Their brain begins searching for answers. It is a deeply wired human response, the need to understand, to categorize, to know where you stand with another person. When you give people predictable emotional responses, you satisfy this need. You become legible, and what is legible is comfortable, and what is comfortable is taken for granted, and what is taken for granted is given less value. But when you withdraw your emotional legibility, when you become still, when your reactions become controlled, when your approval is no longer freely available, something shifts. Their certainty becomes uncertainty. Their confidence in how to handle you becomes doubt. And doubt psychologically is one of the most powerful states you can create in another person. The human mind does not tolerate uncertainty well. It will work to resolve it. It will increase its investment in understanding you. It will spend energy, sometimes an enormous amount of energy, trying to regain what it once had. The comfortable ability to predict your reactions and know where it stands with you. This is the mechanism that explains phenomena most people experience but never understand. Why the person who is less available seems more desirable. Why the colleague who says the least in meetings seems the most authoritative. Why the individual who does not seek approval seems to attract the most genuine respect. It is not coincidence. It is not personality. It is the psychological consequence of emotional scarcity. When your approval, your reaction, your attention are freely available, they have market value of zero. Not because you are without value, but because anything in unlimited supply loses value. This is not a moral statement. It is economics applied to human psychology. When those same things become selective, when people are no longer certain they will receive your reaction, your approval, your engagement, their perceived value rises immediately and significantly. You do not need to be cruel for this to operate. You do not need to be cold or indifferent in ways that destroy connection. You need only be deliberate. You need only make the decision consistently, quietly, without announcement that your attention and emotional response are not automatically available to every person and every situation that requests them. The psychological effect is this: people begin to work for you, not because you demanded it, not because you manipulated openly, but because you created a space, a genuine uncertainty that their minds instinctively move to fill. Obsession is born in this space. Authority is established in this space. Respect lasting, genuine, not purchased through performance is earned in this space. The person who does not care becomes, paradoxically, the person others care most about understanding, because understanding them seems important. Because their approval, though rarely given, feels worth having. Because their presence controlled, quiet, unhurried, communicates something that no amount of loud enthusiasm can manufacture. You do not explain this to people. You do not teach them what you are doing. You simply become it. And you allow the psychology to do what it has always done, to move the minds around you toward the source of controlled, unreadable, deliberate stillness. This is where transformation moves from philosophy into practice. You stop explaining yourself to people who have not earned the explanation. You stop defending your choices to audiences who did not ask to be consulted when the choice was made. You stop rushing to fill silences, as though silence were a problem that needs solving. You stop monitoring other people's faces for signs of approval after you speak. You start operating from a different set of rules. Rules that are not posted publicly, not announced, not defended. They are simply lived. You become selective with your time, not in a way that is performed or announced. You simply begin making different decisions. You decline what does not serve your development. You leave rooms that do not deserve your presence. You do not linger where you are not genuinely valued, not out of bitterness, but out of the quiet understanding that your time is a resource, and resources are not wasted by the powerful. You become selective with your speech. The man who speaks everything he thinks has no mystery, no weight, no authority. The man who speaks only what is necessary, who chooses his words the way a surgeon chooses instruments, commands rooms in ways that the most talkative person in the room will never understand. You begin to understand that silence is not emptiness. It is presence. Heavy, intentional, powerful presence. You become selective with your emotional reactions. Someone provokes you, someone tests you, someone sends a word, a look, an action designed to pull a reaction from you. You feel it. You are not numb. You are not broken. You feel it fully, and you do not move. You let the wave come, and you let the wave pass, and you remain exactly where you were. And in that moment of non-reaction, you have done something that no physical display of strength could replicate. You have demonstrated that you cannot be controlled by external pressure. You practice strategic withdrawal. You are not always available. You do not respond to every message the moment it arrives, as though each one is an emergency that supersedes your own priorities. You move at your own pace. You respond when you choose to respond, and your choice is not governed by anxiety about what the delay communicates. You know exactly what it communicates: authority. You protect your emotional interior. You stop discussing your doubts openly with people who have not earned that access. You stop sharing your ambitions in rooms where they can be diminished. You stop performing your inner life for audiences who will use it against you. Not because you are ashamed of what lives inside you, but because private strength is always more powerful than publicly displayed vulnerability. These are not performances. These are not techniques to be turned on and off. They are a way of operating daily, consistently, quietly, that accumulates over time into something others feel before they can explain, into an authority that is not claimed loudly but simply present. There are people who will try to break this discipline, not always consciously, not always with malice, but the effect is the same. The first are the reactors, people whose own internal instability makes your stillness threatening. They have never learned to manage their own emotions, and your refusal to be drawn into emotional chaos makes them uncomfortable in ways they cannot articulate. They will provoke you. They will escalate. They will say things designed to crack the surface of your control, not because they have a rational strategy, but because your composure challenges everything they have unconsciously accepted about how human interaction is supposed to work. They survive on your reaction. They depend on your emotional response to feel normal. Do not give it to them. The second are the flatterers, people who have learned, through experience, that praise is the fastest path to another person's lowered guard. They arrive with warmth. They arrive with admiration. They tell you that you are exceptional, that your insight is rare, that your judgment is superior. And then, having softened your stillness with manufactured admiration, they make their request, or they plant their idea, or they access the part of you that was not accessible before the praise arrived. Machiavelli wrote about these individuals with particular care. He understood that the man who is immune to insult, but not to flattery, has a vulnerability just as dangerous as the man who can be broken by criticism. Controlled presence protects you from both. The man who does not need approval cannot be purchased by its artificial supply. The third are the energy drainers, people who bring chaos, crisis, and emotional weight to every interaction. They are not always malicious. Sometimes they are simply undeveloped. But their effect on your psychological resources is real, and unchecked exposure to their chaos is erosive. Every minute you spend managing their emotional disorder is a minute not spent building your own power. Every reaction they pull from you is a withdrawal from your reservoir of controlled presence. Identify them early. Engage minimally. Do not explain your distance. Simply create it. The fourth, and most dangerous, is yourself. The part of you that still wants to be liked. The part that feels the discomfort of silence in a room and moves to fill it unnecessarily. The part that received a criticism and needs to respond, to correct the record, to be understood. The part that monitors other people's perceptions of you with the vigilance of a surveillance system and adjusts your behavior accordingly. This internal enemy is not destroyed, it is managed, daily, through repetition, through the accumulation of small, private victories, moments when you felt the pull and did not follow it. This is where the real work lies, not in the grand gestures of controlled power, but in the quiet daily discipline of choosing restraint when every emotional instinct is demanding expression. Your emotions will resist this transformation. They will demand reaction. They will demand expression. They will send urgent signals that speaking, responding, defending, explaining is necessary, that the situation requires it, that people need to understand you, that the silence will be misread, that the cost of restraint is higher than the cost of reaction. These signals are not truth, they are habit. Power demands discipline, not the discipline of suppression, not the grinding numbness of a person who has buried everything alive inside them. The discipline of power is something different. It is the discipline of the man who feels everything and chooses what he does with what he feels. It is the gap between stimulus and response, widened deliberately, maintained through practice, until it becomes the defining characteristic of how you move through the world. The development of this discipline begins with observation. Before you can master your reactions, you must know them. You must sit with the discomfort of watching yourself honestly, without judgment in the moments when your control slips. When did you react when you should have been still? When did you explain when silence would have served you better? When did you check for approval when your own judgment was sufficient? When did you care about something that, in the broader architecture of your actual goals, deserved no space at all? This observation is not self-punishment, it is intelligence gathering. You are mapping the terrain of your own emotional interior, identifying the pressure points, the trigger patterns, the conditions under which your discipline is most tested. Because you cannot defend what you have not mapped. The second phase is practice in low-stakes environments. Discipline, like any other capacity, is built through repetition. You begin small. You hold your reaction in a minor irritation and observe what happens. You choose silence in a conversation where you would normally have spoken, and you notice what that silence creates. You decline to explain a decision that no one actually demanded an explanation for, and you feel the discomfort of the unexplained space, and you sit with that discomfort until it passes. It always passes. The third phase is the gradual expansion of the gap between feeling and response. This is the internal architecture of emotional mastery. You cannot eliminate the feeling, nor would you want to, because feeling is information. But you extend the time between what arrives and what you do with it. You develop the capacity to experience anger, to experience desire, to experience the deep human pull toward approval, and to pause, genuinely pause, before those feelings determine your behavior. Over time, this pause becomes your nature, not a performance, not a mask, a genuinely different relationship with your own interior, one in which you are the authority, not your impulses. This is what Machiavelli meant when he wrote about the necessity of the ruler governing himself before he could govern others. It was never metaphor. It was the most practical instruction he could offer. The man who is governed by his reactions is at the mercy of whoever chooses to produce them. The man who governs his reactions is at the mercy of no one. You are no longer the person you once were. Something has shifted, not dramatically, not with ceremony, not with any announcement that others will immediately notice. But inside the architecture of who you are and how you move, something fundamental has changed. You see differently. Where you once saw a room full of people and felt the quiet anxiety of social assessment, where you fit, what they think, whether you are accepted, you now see clearly. You see who is performing, you see who is seeking, You see who is genuine and who is calculated and who is simply lost. You see the emotional transactions happening around you, the subtle commerce of approval, the bids for status, the testing of positions, and you observe it with the calm of a strategist rather than the urgency of a participant. You think differently. Decisions that once required the consultation of other people's opinions because you needed their validation to feel certain now arise from a cleaner, quieter source. You trust your own observation. You trust your own analysis, not because you have become arrogant, but because you have stopped outsourcing your certainty to people who were never qualified to provide it. You operate differently. You speak less in rooms where speech was previously reflexive. You are still, in moments where you would once have filled the silence with nervous motion. You look at people directly, without the subtle evasiveness of someone who needs something from them. You hold your position in conversations without the constant recalibration of someone monitoring the other person's emotional temperature to adjust their message accordingly. You have become someone who cannot be controlled through the ordinary mechanisms of social pressure, not because you are above social interaction, not because you have withdrawn from the human world into isolation, but because the levers that once worked, the levers of approval and disapproval, of inclusion and exclusion, of praise and criticism no longer move you in the ways they once did. You have felt them, and you have chosen your response, rather than simply producing it. This is the identity of the person Machiavelli described in the courts and councils of the powerful. Not the loudest, not the most aggressive, not the most visibly ambitious, the most controlled. The one whose interior is their own, the one whose presence communicates, without effort, without performance, that they have decided who they are, and no room will change that decision. This is not arrogance. Arrogance is loud. Arrogance needs witnesses. This is something quieter and more complete. This is the authority of a person who has done the interior work, who has chosen their own values over borrowed ones, who has decided what deserves their energy and protected that decision from the constant erosion of social pressure. You are not finished. The work of this identity is never finished, because the world will continue to test it, every day, in 100 small ways and in occasional large ones. But the foundation is laid. The architecture exists, and from this foundation, everything that follows will be different. You have become something most people will spend their entire lives wanting and never quite reaching. Not because they lack the capacity, but because they never understood what it required. You understand it now. From this moment forward, everything changes. Not the world. The world will remain exactly as it is, testing, provoking, offering its usual mixture of opportunity and pressure, admiration and criticism, chaos and stillness. The world does not change when you change, but your relationship to it does. And that relationship is the only thing that was ever within your control. You no longer react impulsively. You feel, you always feel, but you act from the feeling rather than being acted upon by it. You create the pause. You hold the pause. You choose your response from a position of deliberate authority rather than reflexive urgency. You act strategically. Each word you choose to speak is chosen. Each silence you hold is held deliberately. Each room you enter as someone who has decided their position before the room could assign one. Each relationship you invest in is invested in consciously, with an understanding of what is being exchanged and what is being protected. You protect your power. You protect your attention from the people who drain it, from the conversations that consume it without returning anything of value, from the habits of thought that spend it on outcomes you cannot control. You have learned, at the level of genuine belief and not performance, that your attention is the most valuable thing you possess, and you do not give it freely any longer. You protect your mind from the noise of other people's urgency, from the manufactured crises of people who have decided your emotional resources are available for their use, from the slow erosion of unnecessary explanation, unnecessary defense, unnecessary investment in the opinions of people who have never earned that investment, because you now understand what most never will. That the art of not caring is not the art of feeling nothing. It is the art of deciding carefully with the precision of a strategist and the patience of a philosopher what deserves your care and what does not. It is the art of being fully alive inside while remaining unreadable from outside. It is the art of holding your power so completely, so quietly, so without the need for recognition or applause, that it becomes the most permanent thing about you. Machiavelli watched the powerful and the powerless for decades. He recorded the patterns. He distilled the principles. And at the center of everything he observed was the same truth, repeated in every court, every council, every human interaction where authority was held or lost. The most powerful person in any room is the person who needs the least from it. You understand this now, not as a concept, as a way of being. This is not the end. This is the beginning of operating differently, permanently, quietly, without needing anyone to acknowledge the transformation you have made.